everyone. Welcome.
Welcome.
Kathy would like you to know that her horror facts are entirely silent today in honor of Silent Hill franchise.
That's right.
Franchise, so to speak.
So they'll go like this. That was it.
I got those right.
You did. Congratulations.
In other words, there's no horror facts today. And that is perfectly okay because I'll leave it to you to talk about Silent Hill. I know that this was actually something you had brought up wanting to do. So,
well, I think it's one of the, we can't really call it a franchise. There's only been a couple of movies, but there is a very large world that's been built specifically from the video games that then launched the films, right? We saw this a lot, especially during this time that these movies came out. This was a time where a lot of video games were being turned into films. I have to say, the movie kind of, it came and went, but I appreciate the atmosphere of the movie. I'm going to talk a little bit about the world building and the background of the story that I think is actually really cool. That is really the foundation of these two movies. You can understand the movies if you've never played the games, but it makes a lot more sense. I went back. I've played Silent. Did you ever play Silent Hill?
I didn't.
It's a really fun game. I was never like really into it where I know all of this history. I actually had to go back and look at it. But I think once I break it down, if you haven't seen these movies, or if you have and you don't know the games, then the franchise of the games will give a little bit more to the movies, which may make you care more about the movies, and it may also make you understand the world a bit better.
Yeah, it's like I can see how because I haven't played the game and I haven't been in the world except for in the movies, I get why it's like a media franchise, not a movie franchise, right? So it's like,
right.
I think when people call it a franchise, they're talking about like it's a whole gaming thing.
Right.
Gotcha.
And so it was published by Konami, which was, huge. Konami was huge back in the 80s, and they did a lot with Nintendo. So it's a horror anthology media franchise, like Shannon was saying.
Nice.
And it centers on a series of these survival horror games created by Kashiro Toyama. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And published by Konami. So the first 4 video games in the series are Silent Hill, Silent Hill 2, Silent Hill 3, and Silent Hill 4: The Room. They were developed by an internal group called Team Silent, a development staff with former Konami subsidiary Konami Computer Entertainment Tokyo. So there was a lot of thought put into. One thing I love about video games like this and these role-playing games is that the minds that go into developing these worlds, I think, are really brilliant. And another game that I played around the time that Silent Hill came out that gave me the same feeling was a game called Parasite Eve. And if you've played these games, and they came out on like the original PlayStation, you could turn off the lights and the ambiance. There wasn't much verbal. Like now you'll play these RPGs and they have these full on conversations with each other, and it'll stop between boards, and the guy will talk to the other guy, and there'll be this whole dialogue. That was happening through just sound effects and nonverbals. It's very atmospheric. So you'd be walking through snow, and all of a sudden you'd see like a shadow, or you'd hear a gate, or in that way I thought it was very eerie because it almost lacked dialogue.
Yeah.
And I think the movie replicates that. Like it's so much of it is just the atmosphere.
Yeah, one of the things I really love about the movie, the first one, because I really do like this movie. Like it's a 4-star movie for me. Like I really enjoy this movie because I just think it has great horror elements, as I'm sure the game does. Has great horror elements. I care to figure out what's going on, the characters. It changes venue a bunch. There's like a lot going on. I just really enjoy it, and I enjoyed this watch of it as well. Of course, it's dated and all of that, but it didn't matter. I thought it was really good. And that's one of the things that I really love about it is this world building, right? And games are so good at that.
Yep.
And so it's just a no-brainer that it would, if they got in any way good actors or a good script and a good director, like that this would be a hit, because the world building is what we're often missing from horror movies.
100%. And that was what made the video game so addicting, is because you became part of this world. And so the franchise weaves this very dark narrative where the perception of reality is really blurred. And it's blurred within like psychological horror. And why I thought it was great for this show is because it is a combination of psychology and horror together. And I'll get into that in a moment. So there's a timeline of the town.
Okay.
So the first one, Silent Hill's beginnings. So this is 16th through 19th centuries. Now this is not necessarily the order the games came out, because the first game actually starts in 1976.
Oh, okay.
So the world kind of builds backwards as you play. So the Silent Hill's beginnings, though, is 16th through 19th century, and it's before European colonization. The native tribes referred to the land as, quote unquote, the place of silent spirits. So true to history, the English settlers ousted the Native Americans and established a village on the sacred ground. But this mysterious plague strikes in the 18th century, leading to its abandonment. So, in other words, the settlers come in, mess with this spirit, disrupt it, and then there's this curse, right? So Silent Hill was reoccupied in the 19th century, becoming a lucrative mining hub. So European settlers come in, they're like, we don't really care, this is your land. We're going to do what we want to do with it and make money. And I love that idea of like the Native Americans, even though they were ousted, or although they were pushed out, their spirit was strong enough to be like, well, then we're going to fucking curse you. Right? So strange happenings and disappearances start to plague the town because they've messed with this spirit that was calm. Then the second is there's a growing influence of the occult. And this starts in the early 20th century. So by the 1900s, Silent Hill expands, but now its dark reputation is growing. So people are starting to hear like it's really becoming the space where really bad things are happening. The mining operations stop because they start to notice like accidents that are happening, the occult reports. So in 1918, the passenger steamboat called the Little Baroness sinks in Toluca Lake under mysterious circumstances. So the town is now pausing. They're like, what did we do? Why is this happening? And so during this period, the secret society known as the Order takes root, infiltrating public institutions. So now this government is established, right? And now they're leaning into this. So the very first game, if we're looking chronologically, is the game Silent Hill Origins, and that takes place in 1976. So well after this history has now been built, which I think is cool. So Travis Grady, a truck driver, investigates the town after encountering a young girl named Alessa. And if you've watched the movies, you now know who Alessa is. And she's the daughter of the cult leader, Dahlia Gillespie, and is central to the Order's gruesome rituals. So this is what leans us now into the film, although the film is much more based on a mother-daughter. Alessa is still center to the game, but I believe it's a father in the game, not a mother. So that is a really cool background for a game. It's super, like there's so much history there.
Good games have that, right? They're just like steeped in myth and world building and history and relationships. I mean, God, so good. And I watched some of the videos of the game just to like before we did this episode.
What did you think?
And of course, it's like I kind of recognized it, meaning it was in the culture, right? Like it was of the time of that turn of the century.
Yeah.
And I recognized some of the characters, and it's like, I don't know why I recognized it. It's possible that my friends or loved ones at the time were playing it, so I was exposed to it, or that I just saw it in the zeitgeist. It was like this, but it was also a time where studios could do films that were targeted towards like an older teen or a young 20-something, which is actually not common.
Right.
It's usually teens, solidly teens, or adults. So That's an interesting part of it as well. And I guess that's because it had a big college culture probably with playing this game, because it is so grim. It is so abstract in a way, and gross and gory and all of that. So it's just like meant for it skews slightly older. Although now probably a 12 to 15-year-old is fine, but then not so much.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that, I mean, I love the Pyramid King.
Oh yeah, we'll get to the Pyramid Head in a second. So the creatures are so great. So the film follows Rose Da Silva and her adopted daughter Sharon. Sharon's nightmares lead them to the abandoned town of Silent Hill in West Virginia, where they start to seek answers. So at the very beginning of the movie, the adopted daughter is like, all these photos, these images are popping up, and she's like just ruminating on this place. And Radha Mitchell, who plays the mother, who I really love as an actor, I haven't seen her in anything in a while, but I like her. She's like, all right, let's go. Let's figure out what this is. And then they get pulled into the town of Silent Hill, and they get trapped in this alternate reality. And then the video game, the original game, features Harry Mason searching for his missing adopted daughter in the eponymous town. So he stumbles upon a cult conducting a ritual to revive a deity, uncovering his daughter's true origin. So the video game and the film sort of end up meeting into a similar place, except we have a father instead of a mother.
Gotcha.
And he goes searching for her rather than like goes with her.
Gotcha.
Right. The first film introduces some really cool characters, and if you've seen it, then my two favorites would be the nurses.
Yeah, oh my God,
the Pyramid Head guy,
yeah.
And I don't know how you think of this, but when I'm watching it, I'm going, this kind of reminds me of something like Guillermo del Toro would have done, because they use a combination of CGI and special effects.
Yes.
And the scenes with the creatures are so flipping cool.
So
and those
good.
Nurses are professional dancers.
So scary.
They are incredibly trained, like professionally trained dancers. I think they were in the video or the movie Honey with Jessica Alba. I think that was the dance crew that they used. But if you watch their movements, they're phenomenal.
Yeah. Great casting for that. It's just like creature actors are, of course, very popular these days.
Yes.
In the horror scene. And this movie has some great creature actors in there.
Okay, so we have, if you can actually go to Silent Hill fandom page and it'll pull up the category of the monsters. So like Pyramid Head, he's number one, and he makes, his debut in one, but he comes back in two. The Volteal, I think, is one also. It's a monster in the game as well, and his name means attendant, by way of the French word valet. His existence as an angel is derived from, thus he is an attendant of God. He's terrifying. All of these guys are really, really terrifying. They give you, in Silent Hill 2, I don't know how you thought about this, and I'll break down the summaries in just a second to distinguish the films, but Did you see a comparison of like the Hellraiser Cenobites?
Yeah, and absolutely.
I feel like there was a huge influence on that.
That like mannequin creature Hellraiser lady in the second one.
Yeah.
That's, I was like, oh, look, Hellraiser.
So the creatures itself, so cinematically, the creatures are incredible. And you can go, there's a whole page that's dedicated. Then, like I mentioned, the nurse is also really great. So Silent Hill 1 ends, and then it picks up in number 2 with the daughter, the story of the daughter. She's now a little bit older. It also, number 2 has a very young Jon Snow. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
Very, very young. So I feel like this one replicates Hellraiser regarding to like the Cenobite creatures leaving the underworld and seeking out their target in the real world. So what part 2 does is like what a lot of horror films do, like Hellraiser, is then this Silent Hill world comes into the real world and starts to track down our heroine. So I think the creatures are emphasized more and have more of a storyline, like Pyramid Head and the nurses. So you get I think there was a lot more horror in the second one, where the first one felt a lot more psychological to me. But I don't know if you thought the same.
I wasn't a huge fan of the second one.
It's slower.
It came out in 2012, and I just thought there was like so much exposition, and
There
that's
was.
what drags it down and
Yeah.
makes it slow. And that stupid Victor character, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I just didn't. I wasn't. I mean, I love the creatures, but I don't really like this movie. The second one, the first one, I love.
So the second one is Sharon now and her adoptive father, because the mother, dies, have spent the past few years moving from town to town and assuming different identities, including the names of Heather Mason and Harry Mason. So this is now the second film is actually, so I made an error there. The second film is actually the first game. Okay. So Heather believes that they are on the run from the police because Harry killed a man in self-defense and that her adoptive mother, Rose Da Silva, died in a car crash. In fact, he's been protecting her from the Order, a cult of Silent Hill. So Rose goes back, Harry follows her. So Silent Hill 2 is actually game 1.
And was shot 3D, right? It's like Revelation 3D or whatever.
I didn't watch it in 3D, but it was made for 3D.
Nor did I.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like they could have done more of these movies.
Yeah.
Especially because there's such a huge world that I would have loved for them to go back and do like the 16th century.
Yeah.
Use the whole Native American piece. I don't know why they didn't, because
I was looking up and it keeps saying there's going to be another one, but they just never get their shit together.
No, I think it would have happened by now, because they started talking about a third one after 2012 and then it never happened.
They would just have to reboot it.
They would have to reboot it.
Which is what they do these days. So get on it.
But I feel like that was a missed opportunity, because there's a whole world that they could build a large franchise out of this, and they never did it.
Mm-hmm. Do you have favorite monsters?
Well, my two favorite are the pyramid and the nurse. The bubblehead nurse is fun. The incubus is really cool. I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, the pyramid and the nurses, and then I can't remember. Because I looked up the monsters, the screamers. Like those are fucking creepy.
Yeah,
like the face looks just all messed up, and I don't know. If you look at a list of all the creatures, they're really cool. But the Pyramid Man is probably my favorite. And then the nurses are the ones that creep me out the most.
Oh, that's just their movements.
But I mean, there's a lot of really cool, fun creatures. There's those ones on the stilts. There's a lot of them.
I remember when this came out, and there were a lot of negative reviews from the film critics. And I think that's why they didn't take a chance at making a third one. And I think the second one, even based on what you said, was done, it wasn't as good, and it didn't get as much attention as the first one. It took in 8 million and grossed a total of 55 million worldwide. It scored number 5 at the box office when this is the second one. So I don't, but it had a like a lot of people didn't care for it, and I really don't understand why.
We're so used to like sophomore efforts being bad, though. It's just nobody wanted to, I guess, put the money into it or something. Or maybe it just lost because it had that sort of like goth feel to it. And when that kind of went out of style, maybe they just felt like it wasn't going to translate.
You have such a huge, you have a good cast. You have Deborah Kara Unger playing Dahlia, who's Alessa's mother. You have Martin Donovan. You have Malcolm McDowell. You have Carrie Ann Moss. You have Sean Bean. Like, it was a good cast.
Yeah. And I'm not saying it's a 0 out of 5 for me, the second one, right?
Yeah.
It was a 2 out of 5 for me. And the first one's a 4 out of 5. You know what I mean? Like, so I thought it was solid. The script got bogged down, and I guess it got panned in the reviews and stuff. And I can see why, but...
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Also, like... The sophomore effort in a lot of these franchises is ass. So I don't...
That's what I mean. The third one could have been a comeback, because the first one was really good. So I don't know. I'm surprised. And then you'll see some of these other series that make 7, 8, 9, and 10, Killjoy. And
low budget, though. See, this is a big budget movie.
That's true.
So it's like between the big, they just weren't going to get their money back. They probably didn't get their money back on the second one. And they're like, are we going to chance that? Plus, if you look at the timing, this is when we were sort of starting to not put a ton of money into these kinds of movies. It was more like low budget. And of course there were, I'm not saying that was the entire industry, but when we were sort of switching over to streaming, we were kind of going in that direction.
You're right.
So it's like now, like I said, the reboots could either be I just don't think you want to do low budget with this because the creatures are just going to
You
cost
don't.
you a fuck ton of money.
You
And
don't.
you have to have a big studio behind it, and you have to have big stars, and you have to have a great script and all that to reboot it. And as much as we may think those are a dime a dozen, that's a hard combo to have, actually. So
Right. And the effects were done really well. You were talking earlier about the air screamer. I think that's what you were
that's
talking
what it
about. Yeah,
was.
the
Yeah.
air screamer.
Those are cool.
And also, just to say one more thing about that, it did come out at a time where a lot of video game movies were being made. And I do think it just kind of got overlooked.
Absolutely. And if we looked at the culture in that year or something, the early 10s, maybe it just wasn't the vibe. That's what I'm thinking. It just wasn't, they just weren't putting a ton of money into these kinds of movies anymore.
Do you remember the armless man? Do you remember that creature? Mm-mm. He freaked me the hell out. He basically just rolled around.
It's a freaky look.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
he looked like he was in a straitjacket, but he was like all in one skin.
Oh no.
He was pretty terrifying.
That's pretty gross.
Yeah.
Yeah, the creatures are pretty fantastic. Is that what you mean by this movie's highly psychological? I'm not sure we addressed that.
Well, I think that there's a lot of darkness. Like Alessa, so Sharon finds out that she essentially has a doppelganger in this other world, right? Who is her shadow side. And I think then you have Radha Mitchell, who plays the world mother, and then you have Deborah Kara Unger, who plays Alessa's mother. And then you find out there's just like a lot of like family system psychology, but also just the question around identity. And then also the way in which, Alessa's character was basically, raised by an occult, and there were accusations of her being born out of wedlock. And it's very female centric in the sense that like female themes in horror and psychological themes around identity and what it means to be female and just the exploitation. And then, Sharon essentially being pulled into this world where she's seeing a very different form of herself. I just feel that there was a lot of psychology that way of like seeing into this whole other part of her identity and being like, is that me? And how is that part of me?
Right.
And fighting for something that she didn't really know. I don't know. It just, to me, that like the first film, there was a lot of psychology in the first film around that. And it's labeled as a psychological horror in some platforms if you go into it, I think, for that reason.
It definitely feels like that when you're watching it, just going from my own affect when I'm watching it. And that's probably one of the reasons why it's a higher rated film for me, is because not only do I love creature features, so that is an immediate 3-star for me if the creatures are great and if they're scary.
Really good.
The extra star for me is that it followed a storyline that I felt was solid, and it was interesting, and it was kind of sci-fi, and it was witchy, and it was based on like we were talking about world building and all of that. And I do feel like psychologically, even though there is a ton of horror because of the creatures, it's the actual story and the character arcs are more of a psychological torment.
They are. And I think that's where it kind of relates to Hellraiser.
Yeah.
Because we see a lot of that psychology in Hellraiser with the Cenobites. And there must have been some level of influence there because it's almost uncanny in the second one, but it works.
Yeah. I mean, just the creature makers, when they're told like, hey, make this thing, and they make it, and it looks like, they're just, the influence is clear. And hey, that's a great influence to choose.
I mean, yeah, it's just like if you look at the Pyramid Head guy, right? If you think about what his purpose, he appears in the franchise, and he essentially is echoes the executioners of the town's past. So I think there's a lot of psychology in it, and I appreciate that.
Great.
If you go into depth and you start to read more about him, they'll talk about he's a manifestation of James Sunderland's guilt and desire for punishment existing to keep him human and help him remember his past actions. The monster wields the great knife and the great spear, instruments of James' inner torment. By the end of the game, a second Pyramid Head manifests. So I think even if you play the game, you'll find even more of that because of the history and the guy that basically took over the town, and now he's, tormented for life in eternal hell.
Yeah, and if you're not if you didn't play the game, you're not going to get a lot of that. And so that's why I wanted you to speak to that a little bit, because I think that most of us aren't going to go back and play 20-year-old games, but maybe
there might be a resurgence of it. Like there is, I mean, it's PlayStation 5 is having a resurgence of a lot of these games that did really well at that time. But do you remember, lastly, I just want to talk about when we went to Halloween Horror Nights and they had the Pyramid Head guys on those stilts and how awesome those guys were.
So cool.
Really powerful.
It's an amazing creature. It really is. And creatures are definitely one of the subgenres that I am like, oh, it's the most horrible movie in the world. 3 stars for the creature.
It's so cool to watch. So even if you could give 2 shits about the game, if you haven't seen the first one, if you like a creature feature and you like something kind of dark and dreary and creepy, I would watch it. It's
solid.
It's not a waste of time. I'm not mad at it.
Yeah, I hadn't watched it in a long time. I had seen it originally, and then I rewatched it for this, and I had forgotten a lot of the things, and I remembered most of the creatures, but the rest of it was kind of like I had forgotten a lot of it, and I really just enjoyed like Silent Hill, the town. It's just like I want that in my backyard for Halloween. Like it's super cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Super cool. Thank you so much for that, Kathy.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you. This has been an episode of Terror Talk. My name is Shannon.
And I'm Kathy. Sleep safe, everyone.